Join us by the fireside for our evening tales of true life's strange experiences with things that lie beyond the veil of the known and into the misty depths of the mysterious and unknown. Night shift. I used to be a campus security officer, and I would work night shifts by myself from 11 p.m. to about 7 a.m. The college campus, like many campuses in the United States, used to be a military fort. This one had been around since the Revolution, starting as a wooden fort, and then in the Civil War was a granite black fort. And then by World War I and World War II, it was an impressive dirt and concrete stronghold with massive artillery batteries and hidden tunnels crisscrossing the campus. It had a bloody past, with people dying of disease and even one guy that was shot for mutiny there. Many of the old brick buildings were still standing, including the old hospital, barracks, and the officer's house. The hospital and barracks are now classrooms, while the officer's house was converted into a hotel where people could pay to stay while the students learn hosting, management, and even mixing drinks, which, is kind of an interesting program. Now, on this night shift, I was alone. You have to go through all the 200-year-old buildings with nothing but a phone, a flashlight, and a set of keys. Since the college didn't want security to have mace or anything like that, if you found this, dumbass doing drugs or something there, you just have to hope that you can dial the police in time. That's just the way it is. The hauntings, well, the hospital. One night, someone left the lights on the top floor of the hospital. The hospital is only about 4 stories tall, and there were lights on in other places too, so I just kind of, went up the stairs. As I closed the stairwell door behind me and made my way up the stairs, I heard a man asking me a question. With the stairwell throwing the voice around, I couldn't quite make out what he asked. But I know it came from the basement. So, feeling a little bit kind of scared by now, I went down anyway, and I couldn't find anyone. No radios, no signs of people or anything. But it was very, very cold, and I felt kind of dizzy. Looking back, I now realize what I was looking around in and why nobody likes going down there. What do hospitals keep in the basement? The morgue. So, as for the hotel, well, the hotel was definitely the most haunted building. While you could hear voices and get chills in several other buildings, the hotel was one where people would actually see apparitions, and I was lucky enough to see one too. That building just scares me to this day. There was just this feeling in there, feeling of horror or something, and I haven't been there in years. Footsteps, when you're the only one there, there's mumbling from the basement, dragging sounds, you name it. The worst one I remember was hearing a child laughing when I asked who was there, after making sure I was alone. And this was just a very, very creepy laugh. I mean, it just sent chills down my spine. So I just got the hell out of there. Anyway, however, as scary as it was, I was still kind of fascinated by it, and I would just keep going back. Sometimes I would be lucky and have another officer with me for the first couple hours of my shift. We'd go in, turn off the lights, and make sure the doors are locked, and then we would jokingly ask if there was anyone left inside. One night, we got an answer in the form of a dragging sound on the second floor, and the sound of someone screaming, close and distant at the same time, if that makes any sense. So once again, we just got the hell out of there. So on one of my last shifts, I was going through the hotel as two workers were finishing with the cleaning up, and they were both downstairs. One was with me, the other in the basement. As I was finishing, making sure the doors were locked so they could just leave and close the doors behind them, I looked up at the second floor banister above the lobby, in time to see what looked like a woman in a black skirt, dark stockings, and black heels walking from right to left without any sound, and straight into a wall where she melded into the wall and just vanished. You guys are the only ones here. Yeah. No guests tonight at all. Nope. Walked around, confirmed nobody else was there. Nope. Done. I'm out. And that's just the hotel and hospital. There are still the stories that I have of, shadows running across the graveyard. And yes, there's a graveyard there too. A soldier staring at me from the top of the battlements, shadows dancing around the machinery in the welding shop, and voices calling to me from the darkness in other buildings. But, all these were pretty scary but regular events, and, it's an incredibly haunted place. Well, it certainly sounds like a lot of things have happened there in the past, and, a lot of people suffering in one way or another, so it doesn't surprise me that this stuff is hanging there, these emotions, this terror, death, all these things. So it's kind of all the ingredients that go into a truly haunted place. Absolutely fascinating, really. The house across the cemetery. When I was in kindergarten, my parents moved us into this really old house. The main house was the office for a cemetery, but I remember an old lady still lived in the house. We used to go visit her sometimes. In the third and newest of the houses, built in 1830, there was another family who had a couple of older daughters. The youngest daughter was my babysitter. This is an important fact. My mother worked as an ER nurse. So, to start, we moved in and my parents left one specific bedroom untouched. She never explained why to us. One morning, my little brother, about 3 years old then, went investigating in there. He came running out, screaming his head off, scared and in a cold sweat. He kept screaming, "The old man yelled at me!" As I turned to look into the room, the door slammed shut. Not like the wind blew it shut. It's like someone just threw the door shut. No windows were open in the house, as it was winter. Every time we left that door open for even just a second, it would just be slammed closed again. If my brother and I were playing too loudly or something, we would actually hear an old man yelling at us to be quiet. We told my mom. She shrugged her shoulders and told us to listen to him. This continued the whole time that we were living there. My bedroom was huge, and it had a fireplace and these two large closets on either side. I remember on many occasions over several years playing with another little girl in my room. I remember that her name was Elizabeth. She was about my age, between 6 and 7, and she always wore this black dress with long sleeves and a high collar. She wore a white bonnet-type head covering, and she had brown hair and blue eyes. She wore these black leather boots that sort of laced up as well. My mom said she always heard me talking to someone while I was playing in there, but she never saw anyone with me. She thought it was just an imaginary friend. That is, until we went for a walk through the children's section of the cemetery. I saw Elizabeth in the cemetery sitting on a gravestone. I pulled my mom's shirt and I said, "Mommy, there's Elizabeth. Can we play?" When I turned around, she was gone. When we looked at the gravestone where she was sitting, the name was Elizabeth, who died at 6 years old. My mom realized then that my imaginary friend was probably a ghost. I never saw the girl again after we saw the gravestone. Then, our first Christmas in the house, we left to go to church on Christmas Eve. The house was locked. All the lights were off. We didn't have any pets. When we came home, there was a well-lit fire in the fireplace. All the Christmas lights were on, and all the candles my mom put out were lit. This happened every Christmas Eve when we left for church. My dad thought that it was the old lady living in the mansion, as she was our landlord. Nope, it wasn't her. When I was in first or second grade, I distinctly remember having a dream where I could fly. Now, keep in mind that my bedroom was on the second floor. A little boy said, "Let's fly to the playground," and off we went. I remember scooting out my window. I remember feeling the cold air. I remember playing on the playground with him. I remember flying back and seeing my own body in the bed. I remember feeling the ceiling brush my head, and I remember floating back down into my body and going to sleep. I also remember not wanting to wake up the next morning because I was so tired. There was also a lot of stuff moving around. Toys, books, shoes, you name it. And it seemed that there were always other kids in my room somehow. When I told my babysitter about it, she said that was happening with her and her sister too. They were fighting a lot because things would go missing and they would blame each other. Oddly enough, I was never scared. Well, I was scared, though, of making the old man mad, but that was it. I kept telling my parents what was going on. They knew. They were having a lot of the same experiences, hearing a lot of voices and all kinds of things. And then it all changed. In third grade, I was waiting for my babysitter, the girl next door, to come over. She never came over. Years later, my mom and I were talking about it. She told me that my babysitter's dad had killed himself because he was hearing voices in his head. The summer after third grade, I was outside playing and my babysitter came over and we were talking. We just spent time making jokes and swinging on the swings. When my mom got home, I told her that my babysitter had come over, and she said, "That's impossible," and left it at that. I was a little bit confused and I wondered why she would say that. In the same conversation where she told me about my babysitter's dad, my mom told me that my babysitter had been killed in a car accident that day that I said we were playing. My mom was working in the ER when she came in. We ended up moving to a different neighborhood just before I started fourth grade. No more experiences after we moved. Dad and I still talk about it. Almost sounds like this house was on some kind of vortex that connected this world to the next world and the spirit world. There's just so much going on in this, so many experiences and things, even astral projection and, entities coming and going. It definitely sounds like some kind of, portal or something like that. So really good that you got out of there, though, because it sounds like not a very healthy place to be by any means. And certainly, I think your dad made a very wise decision because something sooner or later may very well have happened to you. The village healer. This experience happened a few years ago. I was actually a teenager at the time, and my recollection of the events at, firsthand is pretty good. I'm saying this since I do see that a lot of answers come from people remembering stuff happening to them when they were kids. Anyway, in order to completely understand this story, you do need to know two important things. The story is taking place in Southern Europe, and that's where I'm from, and it is a story that completely changed my view on life. It all began with a small skin problem that I had. I used to have warts. I've had them since I could remember. They were always located on my hands and always presented this terrible thing that I had that many other people don't. My confidence levels were okay for a teenager at least, but I was always kind of ashamed of my hands and I didn't really want anyone to see them. I didn't feel comfortable showing hands in public. I would just get nervous holding my girlfriend by her hand. Shaking hands was, somewhat of a trouble as well. So basically, that gives you a picture of how it was. Hand warts are a pain. So time went by and I realized I had to do something about this problem. So anyway, I decided that I would go and get treated for this. Coming from Europe, I have free health care, and I had absolute total belief in medicine and science, so I went and I visited a skin doctor. So they scheduled a treatment for me, and I just got on with it. The treatment included burning the warts with different types of medications, as well as application of different types of creams and powders, etc. This had been going on for several months, but the warts would just simply not go away. Don't get me wrong, the creams and powders, as well as some other treatments they tried, gave solid results, but only for a brief period of time. A week or two later, my warts would reappear, and the whole thing would just start all over again. So this had been going on for quite some time, and at that point, I was just starting to lose my patience. I was desperate. I didn't know what to do. So I decided to go and visit a private skin clinic. It cost me a lot of money, but what else could I do? So I just had to deal with it since it was becoming unbearable. And after several treatments at the clinic, the results were basically the same. Yes, they had better equipment and they had fancier medicine, but the end result was always the same. The warts would come back. This was the moment when I was just becoming so desperate. It was also a moment when I started questioning science. How is it possible that we managed to send a man to the moon, yet we can't cure something as stupid as warts? At this point, my private doctor actually told me that she knows a guy who deals with some sort of enchantment and that he knows these special techniques that can cure me in one day. I was super skeptical towards this, and I completely shunned her story and went home. After a while, I told my parents that the doctor mentioned this guy. He lives in a village close to my hometown. I also told them that I completely ignored it since I don't believe in magic and stuff like that. I was a well-educated, strong-minded individual, and I could never believe in things that were scientifically unproven, like religion included. Some time passed, and my doctor somehow gets in touch with my parents and tells them about this guy. Long story short, my problem grew, and as I was becoming impatient and severely displeased with my hands and their appearance, I sat down and I had a talk with my parents. We agreed that we would give this guy a chance. I was so desperate at this point, and I told myself, to hell with it. I might as well have a good laugh at this random village guy and his, shenanigans. So we got in a car and we went to the village where he lived. As we were approaching his house, we noticed that there were actually many cars parked outside. This guy is kind of famous, it seemed. Some of those cars were pretty fancy, I tell you, some rich people visiting him. It was quite surprising seeing such nice cars in such a remote part of my country. So we walked in, and the guy looked normal, just one of those random dudes that you see every day, a guy that would, buy bread or milk every day at his local shop, that regular kind of guy. So he asked about my problem. I explained it to him in detail, and he just silently nodded his head. He then said that I have to follow him behind his house, and that my parents should wait for me in front of the car. Of course, I was a little bit afraid at this point, but my parents gave me a reassuring look, and so I decided to follow this guy. I guess nothing that bad could have happened since, my parents were so close by. Anyway, we walked slowly while he was smoking. At one point he stopped. He pointed me towards himself, yet brought my hands slightly upwards. They were being directly shined upon by moonlight. He then told me to be quiet and not move. He grabbed my hands and started touching them very vaguely. I can't really explain it, just like barely touching them with the end of his fingers. He was whispering something in a language I could not understand. My feet felt like they were shaking. I honestly thought that I was gonna, just faint or something. This went on for about 30 seconds. In the end, he brought his head down and took a deep breath. He told me that I need to come tomorrow and the day after as well. I was dead silent. We proceeded back to my parents in our car. They had a small talk, and once they paid him, he only takes symbolic donations since his gift should be free for everyone, his words. We got in a car and we drove ourselves home. I was just silent the entire trip. What I had just experienced was completely otherworldly. It just really shook me. Yet I was still very skeptical. Finally, my parents asked me how it was. I explained to them the entire thing in great detail, and once again I commented on it that the guy is probably a fraud. There was no way on earth that this would work. Regardless, I decided to give him a chance, and I agreed to go there 2 following days as well. Both days, the routine was exactly the same. Just went there, got behind his house, give him my hands, he whispers stuff for 30 seconds, the moon shines, he finishes. All done. After my 3rd visit, he told me that I am now cured and that I should never have to worry about warts again. I was like, yeah, right. I've heard that story before. He just said to follow the moon and never worry again. Heavy stuff. So we paid him and went back home. A couple of days passed and nothing changed. The warts were still there and I was as displeased as before. Hell, even more. This guy took our money for basically doing nothing, absolutely nothing. On the fourth day, I think, I woke up having this weird feeling on my hands. The largest wart I had shrunk significantly. I swear it was unbelievable. It looked completely different than what it did just 5 days ago. I immediately showed it to my parents and we were all shocked. Yet, it was still no time for celebration. Days went on and I kind of stopped thinking about it. I had a pretty important semester at school at that point, and I would check every couple of hours or so, but didn't really bang my head around it. Approximately 10 days after the visit, all of the smaller warts that I had on my fingers were gone. It was a miracle, I tell you. I have never, ever experienced anything like that. I have never even seen anything like that. Long story short, 20 days after, all of my medium-sized warts were gone as well, and my two biggest ones were reduced to a size of something that you wouldn't even consider was a wart. 1 month later, my hands were clean and looking like those of a piano player. Today, more than 7 years later, I still have no warts whatsoever. I have no idea what that guy did. I don't know whether it was magic or something else. But this is by far the biggest paranormal experience I've ever had. And I must say that it made me broaden my horizons extensively about what folklore and old tales have to say. I've told this story numerous times, and every time I tell it to people, they are just in complete awe. You usually hear about stories like this, but it is quite rare to just hear it from someone who directly experienced it firsthand. So I'm just actually quite grateful that I decided to go and see that guy and just kind of expand my mind, I guess. Wow, that's a pretty powerful healing experience you had there. And yeah, there are still some places where you find people like this who can heal in this way. And these are usually more naturally gifted people who, were usually born with these special skills rather than acquiring them later or anything like that. So, wow, that's certainly quite an interesting experience. Be interesting to know what country you're from as well.